Hi, it's March 15th, 2020, and I'm Timo Beckwith, artist, sculptor, and I am putting the final section of coating in a product called Form Air on this sculpture. And to do that, I wanted to make a little video. First thing you want to do using this product is put on a pair of good quality gloves because it is a epoxy based product, and comes in buckets like this. To make a batch, one needs to create first a ball and then match the size. So you want to do, it's a 1-to-1 mixture. So here I am making a ball, and that is the gray material. Now I want to make a ball of equal size to match it. So it's 1-by-1, or 1-to-1 by volume mixed ratio. It looks like I have a little bit more gray maybe than the white. Put a little bit more white in there. So I've been working on this sculpture for quite a while. Actually started it many years ago, never finished it. But having found this particular material, and I just found it much easier to complete the project with this material as opposed to another similar product which is much heavier and more difficult to work with. But I'm in love with this material. It's fantastic. It dries, or it catalyzes super hard, super tough, exterior grade, and extremely light. It's so light it will float in water. So these are looking pretty much about the same size. Okay, now I'll seal up my buckets and start mixing it. So the first thing I'm going to do here is make kind of a patty out of the gray material, and then make a patty out of the white material. It's kind of crumbly too, so it's good to work over a board so you don't lose all those crumbs. Then I'll tear this in half and keep folding it on itself like this, and then just start mushing it over the board so that the parts that drop can be picked up just by tapping and mixed back in. Mixing in, just basically massaging it. And what you want to do with this is get it to where it's all one even color. No spots of white and gray, just an even gray color. This is a fairly big wad here. I'm hoping to finish this section with it, maybe with a little bit left over to do a couple of other little just a couple other little places that I want to add some to. So I'm excited to actually have this last primary segment done. A couple other little things to do, but for the most part this is the last major application of material. One of the interesting things about this material is that it catalyzes more rapidly the thicker it is. And I have had issues with making a big ball like this and having the center of it catalyzed due to the thickness and then being unable to utilize that part of it because it was hard. Getting pretty well mixed now. It's a very windy day. I've got a little bit of a wind block near the camera. Hopefully we're not getting a lot of wind noise in the audio. Typical spring day on the Central Coast. So oftentimes when I get this pretty close to mixed, I will take it into the shade so I can really look at it. So that looks like it's about it. It's pretty well mixed. I take it into really deep shade, full deep shade, so that I can see it without any reflections that might hide the fact that something isn't properly mixed. Okay, so we've got this nice big ball here. Now I'm going to work pretty quickly, taking pieces like this, kind of rolling them, and just putting them on. Oh, forgot one section, because I'm not used to narrating. So my hands have got this sticky on it. I'm going to go put them in water. Okay, so I got my hands nice and wet. Now I'm going to rub them like this to kind of liquefy all that material, and then put it on the substrata, which is styrofoam and thermoplastic netting. The netting is called Veriform. And I get all this from a company in San Francisco called Douglas and Sturgis. Now this part up here is catalyzing pretty well. So after I do this, I'm going to go in and texturize that. But here I gotta keep moving here and just putting it on like this, kind of roughly. And it's very easy to move this material around. It's very similar to the feeling of a nice fine grade clay when it's got a lot of moisture in it. So I'm kind of building up around that edge. I want to make sure that I get a fairly even thickness on here. For one thing, just to make sure that that thermoplastic is thoroughly buried, in part to insulate it from any solar heat, and also to make sure that everything is very strong. As far as I can tell so far, this has really strengthened all of these kind of appendage-like portions of this piece very nicely. Another piece here, kind of roll it, stick it on. So this part goes pretty fast, fairly adjustable later. I also, to make sure that I get good adhesion, I'm sort of tapping it in, you can see, with the base of my hand. There comes that wind. It's really nice the way you can just kind of push this around before it catalyzes. Looks like I have just about the right amount of material here, maybe a little bit extra, which is perfect because I can stick it somewhere else to patch the little spots. So now that I'm pretty close to coated this entire segment, I'm sort of evening it out as best I can, just with the palm of my hand, like this, tapping. On a curved thing like this, one really needs to move around because the line that you see keeps changing as you move around. And you know, if you have thick or thin spots, you have to move like that to see them. Okay, so that's looking pretty well distributed. And still have a lot of material in my hands. And wet my hands like this. Kind of put a little bit of that on the Form Air. And now the cool part that I was excited to share is that I have a brush here which has got water. And I've discovered that for this type of form in particular, the brush works fantastic for smoothing it out. And the water does not cause any problem with strength after the fact. When this catalyzes, it catalyzes nice and hard, whether it was wet on the top or not. But the water allows the brush to smoothly glide over the surface. The ferrule here kind of works as a flattener, and the bristles kind of work as a rounding element. So you can see how quickly this becomes round. You can kind of move larger areas with this without digging in too much if you're very careful. So that it's a very touchy-feely kind of thing. One really needs to be sensitive and trying to blend this part nicely with the existing area. See, that's, I know you can't see the back side, of course. I have to work it all at the same time before it starts to catalyze. This part up here is catalyzing nicely, and I'm going to start texturizing that shortly. Okay, now you'll be able to see a little bit more what I'm doing. I'll try to stay reasonably outside the frame. Kind of up and down strokes, watching that edge. Looking for parts that are too thick or not thick enough, and moving it as need be. See a little lump right there. Push that down. So once I get it to that phase where it looks pretty smooth, I also like to do strokes this way and the opposite to kind of even things out in another direction. Really helps to create the roundness and control that feeling of roundness in the piece. This technique would work very well on large smooth areas as well, just for smoothing, because the ferrule here becomes like a flat tool and the bristle really smooths it out, keeps it from digging in. Coming out very nice, blending with the previous element right now. Looks sweet. All right. I'm gonna stop right there and go into texturizing. So for texturizing, I'm using sandpaper, very coarse sandpaper, and just lightly tapping it after it begins to catalyze. Sometimes I get the sandpaper wet too, so it doesn't stick quite so much. This makes for a very rough surface texture, but it will be sanded down with a very coarse sandpaper, like probably the same one I'm texturizing it with. After it's catalyzed, the whole thing will be sanded and then blown off with the air hose. Which will give it a very stone-like feeling. This is a little too wet here, but I want to make sure I get clear underneath. So I'm blocking the view, but gotta do it. All right. You can also tap a little bit if you see something that needs to be flattened out. You tap it a little bit with sandpaper. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I'll texturize the rest of it in a little while when it's a bit more catalyzed. Now, grabbing my dental tools. One of the nice things about this material too is you don't have to worry about cleaning up too much, because you can always take a knife and clean your tools. when you're ready to use them again. These are little dental tools, and I find them to work very well for texturizing. And this texture technique is kind of to replicate the look of stone. So I got a pointy one and a hooked one, and I just tap lightly into it. You can very easily tell what areas are more catalyzed or less catalyzed when you're tapping it with the dental tool due to the degree of resistance. So the whole thing, every surface has received this final treatment. A lot of tapping, thousands and thousands of taps. The tool picks up a lot of material, and then kind of have to clean it off and keep tapping. It's also important to work with a lot of fresh air when you're using this material, because it does off-gas some toxic fumes, and if you're going to really work with it a lot, you probably want to use a respirator. But because of that, I try to avoid breathing deeply when my face has to be really close to the surface, like that. So that's looking pretty consistent with the straight tool. And now I'm getting the little hooky tool and tapping with that. And as I do that, I'm spinning it. So it does make a bit more of a linear depression. And that by spinning it, it makes it look really random instead of just completely repeated, all going the same direction. You see I'm twisting the tool as I go, and I'm not doing as many of these. But the combination creates a pretty cool texture, actually, I think. All right, that's it for now. This part here remains to be texturized. Smoothing out the transition here just a little bit more. It is catalyzing nicely, but not out of hand. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to take my gloves off and shut off the camera. I'll put the gloves, clean hands, and that's it, working with Form Air from Smooth On Products. All right.